In August 2011, a U.S. tax investigator typed a name into the IRS database. The system came back with 3 words: no records found. The name belonged to one of the most powerful men in world soccer. He lived in Trump Tower. He rented a second apartment there, $6,000 a month, for his cats. And he had not filed a tax return in nearly 20 years. Pulling on that one thread would eventually topple the leadership of FIFA, the body that runs world football, and drag 50 years of bribes, bought votes, and World Cups sold behind closed doors into a Brooklyn courtroom. This weekend, that same organization stages the richest World Cup final ever played. Around $13 billion will flow through FIFA this cycle, most of it, ultimately, from fans. So before kickoff, it's worth knowing exactly who's hosting the party. 2 ground rules first. Everything you're about to hear is documented. Court verdicts, U.S. Department of Justice indictments, and reporting from the New York Times, Der Spiegel, and the Sunday Times. And none of it means any match you watched was fixed. Corrupt officials and corrupted scoreboards are 2 different accusations. Keep them separate. We'll come back to why. The investigator's name was Steve Berryman, IRS, Criminal Division. He also happened to be a football obsessive, the kind who sets a 5 a.m. alarm for Liverpool games, spends vacations at World Cups, and still plays Sunday League. The man with no tax returns was Chuck Blazer, 300 pounds, a beard out of a pirate movie, and at the time, the only American on FIFA's executive committee. The small club of men who decide where World Cups go. Decades of unfiled taxes add up to decades of potential prison time. But that wasn't the question keeping Berryman up at night. His question was simpler. How does a man this rich, this visible, this senior, go untouched for 20 years? The answer had little to do with Blazer being careful. It had everything to do with the organization behind him, and the fortress it had built around itself. FIFA moves more money in a 4-year cycle than many multinationals. Legally, though, it's registered in Switzerland as a non-profit association, the same category as a fishing club or a village choir. That classification means no serious external audits, no shareholders to answer to, no independent board. It earns like a conglomerate and gets policed like a bake sale. And until 2015, Swiss law didn't even treat private sector bribery as a crime. An official could take a kickback in Zurich, and there was nothing on the books to charge him with. Shield number 2. The hostage rule. FIFA's statutes ban governments from interfering in football. Any state that investigates its own federation risks the ultimate sanction: global suspension. Clubs banned. National team out of the World Cup. Greece got the threat. Kuwait and Indonesia got suspended. No politician anywhere wants to be the one who got the national team banned. 50 million fans make an excellent human shield. If you watched our video about the presidential phone call and the red card, you already know this statute. Hold on to it. It comes back at the end. Shield number 3. The back room. For decades, World Cup hosts and billion-dollar contracts were decided by 24 men on the executive committee, voting behind closed doors. No reasons published, no outside audit, answerable to nobody. Several of those men, as you're about to see, were themselves on the take. The people doing the stealing were also the people doing the oversight. Law couldn't reach it. Governments wouldn't touch it. Insiders had no reason to talk. And for 2 decades, exactly one man kept swinging at that wall anyway. Zurich, 2002. Sepp Blatter, FIFA's president, has just been re-elected. At the press conference, a gray-haired British reporter takes the microphone and asks, on camera, "Herr Blatter, have you ever taken a bribe?" The room froze. Sports reporters didn't ask that question, and there was a structural reason why. Access, World Cup credentials, player interviews, press box seats. FIFA controlled all of it. Ask the wrong question, and your outlet was done. Most people kept their heads down. Andrew Jennings didn't need the access. He was an investigative reporter whose resume read like a crime series: Scotland Yard corruption, the heroin trade, and a book on the International Olympic Committee that helped blow open the Salt Lake City bribery scandal. FIFA sued him twice. He kept digging. That stubbornness bought him the one thing Access can't: trust from the inside. People within FIFA had been sickened for years by what they saw. They just didn't know which journalist was safe until they watched an old man ask the president of FIFA to his face whether he took bribes. Weeks later, an insider met Jennings at night on a Zurich street and handed him a stack of confidential documents, payment records from a company most fans had never heard of. To understand what he was holding, rewind to 1974. In 1974, FIFA had 6 full-time employees and roughly $30 in the bank. A caretaker of rule books. Then came the coup. A Brazilian businessman named João Havelange had noticed 2 things nobody else had. Dozens of newly independent nations in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean were hungry for standing on the world stage. And in FIFA elections, every country's vote weighs the same, Brazil's and a tiny island's alike. So he campaigned across more than 80 countries, and he brought a weapon nobody could match: Pelé. To federations no one had ever bothered to visit, Havelange made a simple promise: vote for me and money will come. Stadiums, youth academies, development funds. In 1974, he unseated the Englishman Stanley Rouse, the last of the old amateur gentlemen, and football's governing body changed species. Promises need cash. Enter Horst Dassler, son of the founder of Adidas. In 1976, after 18 months of lobbying, Dassler talked Coca-Cola into an $8 million global sponsorship, the first deal of its kind, the one that invented modern sports sponsorship. The vault filled, and Havelange started paying his voters. Expanded World Cup slots for Africa and Asia. Development grants with almost no oversight wired to small federations. Every 4 years, like clockwork, those federations voted him back in. Watch the loop. Money buys votes. Votes protect power. Power makes more money. That flywheel would eventually swallow half of world football, and it started spinning right there. Dassler went further. In 1982, he set up a company called ISL and took exclusive worldwide rights to sell World Cup broadcasting and sponsorship. A public treasure, the world's game, became a private carving board. And ISL was the company on Jennings's documents, a ledger of 175 bribe payments between 1989 and 1999, totaling roughly $100 million. Jennings put it on the BBC. In 2008, a Swiss court handling ISL's bankruptcy confirmed bribes on that scale from the bench. One detail from those years is almost comic. In 1997, a kickback of 1.5 million Swiss francs, meant for Havelange's private account, was wired by mistake into FIFA's official account. The evidence had delivered itself to headquarters. The General Secretary noticed and quietly forwarded the money to its intended recipient. That helpful General Secretary's name was Sepp Blatter. A year later, Havelange retired, and Blatter took the chair. Blatter refined the playbook. His flagship program poured over $2 billion into pitches and football schools in poor countries. And reporters kept noticing the same pattern. The money tended to land in sync with his re-election campaigns. In that system, loyalty was worth more than clean books. Vote correctly, and nobody in Zurich looked at your accounts. Kickbacks and votes. That was the machine at cruising speed. Then it found a bigger product, the World Cup itself. In 2015, Der Spiegel reported that Germany's beloved 2006 World Cup, the summer fairy tale, had a hole in its bid accounts. 10.3 million Swiss francs, traced to a private loan from the Adidas CEO of the day, suspected of swaying decisive votes. Germany won hosting rights 12-11, with one committee member abstaining at the last moment. The repayment was routed through FIFA itself, labeled as funding for an opening gala. The gala never happened. No one has ever been convicted, and the money has never been fully explained. South Africa, which lost that vote, won the 2010 tournament, and according to the U.S. indictment, $10 million moved out of World Cup funds, relabeled as a Diaspora Legacy Program, to a Caribbean power broker named Jack Warner. Remember Warner, Blazers' longtime partner, controller of a block of votes, the man who once funneled his own country's World Cup ticket allocation through a family travel agency, forcing fans to buy marked-up packages just to watch their team. Then, December 2, 2010, the day FIFA outdid itself. Both the 2018 and the 2022 World Cups were awarded on the same afternoon. Blatter opened the envelope and read the 2022 host, Qatar. A Gulf state with 50-degree summers and barely a domestic league, beating the United States. The tournament would later be shoved from summer to winter just to be playable. How were those votes assembled? The Sunday Times obtained millions of internal documents and traced more than $5 million flowing from a Qatari football official's private slush funds to federation bosses across dozens of countries. And above the cash sat deals between states. 9 days before the vote, a lunch at the Élysée Palace, President Nicolas Sarkozy hosting Michel Platini, head of European football, the most influential vote on the continent, and the Crown Prince of Qatar. Platini had been leaning American. After lunch, he voted Qatar. In the years that followed, Qatari money bought Paris Saint-Germain, Qatari television took French league broadcast rights, and Qatar signed multi-billion-dollar fighter jet deals with France. Asked about it later, Blatter offered rare candor. Of course, it was about money. Platini's own defense may be even better. If your president asks you for something, what do? French prosecutors are still working through that lunch today. The 2018 ballot has its own line in the U.S. files. Prosecutors allege Warner took $5 million to vote for Russia. Under global pressure, FIFA hired a former U.S. federal prosecutor, Michael Garcia, to investigate its own bidding process. He spent 2 years and wrote more than 400 pages. FIFA sat on the report and released a 42-page summary instead, declaring Russia and Qatar essentially clean. Garcia called the summary a misrepresentation of his work and resigned. FIFA kept the full report locked away for 2.5 more years and only published it in 2017, after a German newspaper obtained a leaked copy and was about to print it. So by the mid-2010s, everything was public. The books, the front pages, the resignations, and the institution stood untouched. Paper could shame it. No law could reach it. Except, remember the two things the shields never accounted for. The first is the dollar. Nearly every international dollar wire on Earth clears through systems based in the United States. Under American law, if bribe money so much as touches that plumbing, U.S. prosecutors have jurisdiction, whoever you are, wherever the deal was done. None of FIFA's shields cover that. The second is a law written in 1970 to destroy the mafia, RICO. Prove that someone belongs to a criminal enterprise, and he answers for the enterprise's crimes, including the ones he never personally touched. A clearing system and a mob statute. The tools had been sitting there for decades. They were waiting for the man who found the loose thread. Berryman traced Blazers' money. Millions in undeclared income. Offshore accounts never disclosed. The FBI came in with leads of its own. And on the evening of November 30th, 2011, in the glass atrium of a Manhattan office tower, quiet enough to hear your own footsteps, Berryman and an FBI agent sat down across from an unsuspecting Chuck Blazer. Berryman opened with lines he had rehearsed for weeks, that he was doing this for the right reason. Football had been his whole life, and he wanted the dirt out of it. Then he lowered his voice. You haven't filed taxes in years. He walked through everything they had, slid the subpoena across, and added one sentence. We need your help. A long silence. Blazer exhaled. I'll help. From that moment, the only American on FIFA's executive committee became the U.S. government's man inside world football, the highest-placed mole in the history of sport. At the 2012 London Olympics, Blazer rode his mobility scooter between five-star hotels and private parties, chatting with the most powerful men in the game, a recorder hidden inside his keychain. In an unmarked van down the street, 2 agents checked the audio, segment by segment. The lords of football talked. A keychain smaller than a coin remembered every word. 3.5 years of recordings, subpoenas, and bank trails all drained toward a single morning. May 27, 2015, just before dawn. The Baur au Lac, a 5-star hotel on Lake Zurich, was full of FIFA executives in town to re-elect their president. Plainclothes officers walked to the front desk with a list. These gentlemen. Which rooms? 7 of the most powerful men in football were led out through the lobby. To hide from the cameras, some held the hotel's white bedsheets over their faces. A New York Times reporter staying in the hotel posted the scene live. Hours later in Brooklyn, the Department of Justice unsealed an indictment more than 160 pages long. 14 defendants, 47 felony counts, racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, filed under that same anti-mafia statute. Attorney General Loretta Lynch described FIFA's corruption in 3 words: rampant, systemic, deep-rooted. The core charge: over 2 decades, more than $150 million in bribes around World Cup broadcasting and marketing rights. Among the arrested, Blatter's chosen heir and the regional barons of the Americas. Blatter himself wasn't on the list, and 2 days later he stood for election anyway and won a 5th term. Then football's real owners lost patience. Coca-Cola, Visa, McDonald's, Budweiser, the sponsors wiring in hundreds of millions a year, publicly demanded a cleanup. 4 days into his new term, Blatter stood at a podium, eyes down, and resigned. 1 month later, at a FIFA press conference, a British comedian slipped in with a fake press pass, walked straight to the podium, and showered Blatter with counterfeit banknotes. The photograph, the most powerful man in football, arms raised against falling money, became the defining image of half a century. More than 40 people were eventually charged or arrested. Only 3 ever faced a jury. José Maria Marin, the former head of Brazilian football, in his 80s, guilty on 9 counts, 4 years, weeping in court in a prison jumpsuit that didn't fit. Juan Angel Napout, of South America, 9 years, the heaviest sentence. Peru's Manuel Burga, the only acquittal. Chuck Blazer pleaded guilty to 10 felonies and kept cooperating. Sentencing was deferred, and in 2017 he died of cancer before any court pronounced on his life. Jack Warner fought extradition from Trinidad for 10 years. In September 2025, a high court judge ruled that the 2 countries never had a valid extradition treaty in force. Proceedings permanently stayed. Warner, 82, walked out of court and told reporters he could finally restart his life, but it's 10 years too late. He has never stood trial anywhere. Blatter was never charged in the American case. His own ethics committee banned him over an unexplained 2 million franc payment to Michel Platini. Swiss prosecutors tried him for fraud, and Swiss courts acquitted him, twice, in 2022 and 2025. Acquitted, yet still banned. The ban runs to 2028, when he will be 92. Platini, same payment, same acquittals, never returned to football's inner circle. And days before this World Cup kicked off, he filed a criminal complaint in Paris against FIFA's current president, Gianni Infantino, alleging the whole investigation was a malicious prosecution designed to clear the field for a rival. 10 years on, the case is still writing new chapters. And Andrew Jennings, the man who tore the first hole in the wall, died in January 2022 at 78. One sports corruption watchdog wrote his obituary in a single line. If the last 30 years of change in world sport belong to one name, that name is Andrew Jennings. Some things genuinely changed. Switzerland criminalized private sector bribery. The press nicknamed the amendment Lex FIFA. World Cup hosts are now chosen by all 211 member associations in an open vote. 24 men in a room no longer decide. The ethics committee was rebuilt. A generation of management was swept out. Other things didn't. After the reforms, FIFA quietly added a defamation clause to its own ethics code, tightening what insiders may say out loud. Whistleblower protection remains thin. Berryman, the investigator who started it all, put it plainly when he retired. This case isn't over, and maybe it never will be. As long as the World Cup is worth this much and the power sits with this few, the old temptation isn't going anywhere. Now, the promise from the top of this video. Every charge in this story lives in the ledger. Bribes, bought votes, hosting rights, proven in courtrooms, indictments, documents. What has never been proven, anywhere, is a fixed World Cup match. Half a century of investigations produced mountains of the first and none of the second. So watch the games, and watch the institution's wallet. Do both. And if this playbook feels familiar, an institution whose rules bend when power leans on them, it should. Earlier this summer, one phone call from the White House lifted a World Cup red card in 24 hours. We made a whole video about it. 50 years of history says that call ran on a very old operating system. This weekend, the richest final in World Cup history kicks off. Enjoy the football. It's still the best game on earth. Just remember who's holding the cash box. For more stories about the visible hand, the hand that moves rule books and institutions, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.